I was born in 1936 in Perry, Arkansas, 82 years ago. My name is Lydia Ann Reinhardt Wilson. Shall I tell all of it? But Mama left Daddy because he drank and mean when he got drunk. He could whip everybody, and he was abusive. But he would always pick on my brother. He was 7 years older than me, and he never did abuse me much, except he would thump me on the head. And I swore up and down I'd never thump one of my kids on the head. As far as I know, I never did. So Mama left him, and we moved to Springdale, Arkansas. Mama and Daddy divorced, and he was out of our lives for quite a while. My neighbor took me to church one night on a Saturday. They were having a children's crusade at the First Assembly of God, and I was 11 years old, and the very first time Jesus spoke to my heart, I went to the altar. I never knew how I got there, but I remember praying and asking Jesus in my heart. And I went home and told Mama and Daddy and my brother that I had gotten saved, and they all treated it like, oh, that's fine. But they never saw that I got to go to church anymore. And then when we moved to Springdale, when I was 11, a little after 11, the Nazarene Church was 2 blocks in front of my sister's house, up a side street, and I started going to Sunday school there. And I told the Lord, if you will keep me while I'm growing up and a teenager, and not let me get into sin, deep sin, or any of that, when I get old enough to do what I want to do, I'll give you my life. And the Lord answered my prayer. Joe and I, we met, and I lived in Springdale, and he lived in Fayetteville, and so he liked me, and so he come and started going to church. We went together for 8 or 9 months before we got married. He was in the milk business, delivering milk to the houses, and then he went retail, delivering to stores. And we were doing quite well financially. We bought a house, a modest house, and in the fall of 1956, he told me he thought he had a call to preach. Scared me to death. I said, I don't know how to be a preacher's wife. Let's see, I would have been 22. There was an old woman at church that was a prayer warrior, and he asked her on Wednesday night. Her name was Sister Potter, and he said, would you pray for me? And she come back on Sunday morning, met him at the door, shook his hand, and said, Joe, is the Lord calling you to preach? And he said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, answer that call. And Joe went down to the basement, and he said, I don't know when I'll be home. I'll be home when I get an answer. And he stayed in that room and prayed until he knew he was called to preach. He was afraid to open his eyes. He backed out of the room because he said, I knew I would have seen Jesus or the Holy Spirit standing there. And my husband became a preacher in 1956. But anyway, the pastor's wife, our old pastor's wife, told me, said, you don't have to be a pastor's wife. Do you know how to be Joe's wife? And I said, yes. Because we'd already been married, for 4 years by then. And I said, yes. And she said, You just be Joe's wife, and whatever needs to be done in the church, be free to do if you can, but just be Joe's wife. I was born in 1936 in Perry, Arkansas, 82 years ago. My name is Lydia Ann Reinhardt Wilson.
I like it.
That's the fan. I mean, the light.
Do you hear humming?
I mean, I do in my head, but
Okay. So, where did you go to school?
Marlton. I started at Marlton, and they said I was too little. I was 6 years old, and so I started at Ada Valley, a one-room schoolhouse, and they did all the recitals, first grade, second grade, and I learned all the second grade, so they promoted me to the third. And then I went to school at several other schools, but I graduated from Springdale High School, Springdale, Arkansas.
What year was it that you went to? So you started school in what year?
1942, I was 6.
And then you graduated in what year?
1953.
Do you remember the World War II years?
Yes.
What was
I
that
remember when the president died. And
Wilson?
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt.
And then Truman took over.
Okay. When you were young, did your mother work?
No.
Okay. What did your mother do for a living?
She was only a housewife and a homemaker, and Dad worked spasmodically. He just couldn't keep a job.
Okay.
We were very poor.
What did he do when he did have a job?
Mostly he was a sharecropper or a farmer.
Did you ever help in the field?
Yes, I learned to chop cotton and pick cotton. When I was 10, I made a hand as a cotton chopper and picking cotton in the fall.
Did y'all do it all by yourself, or did anyone help?
We did it with the farm families that was sharecropping also in Missouri, southeast Missouri.
Like in your area, like they would...
It was like a plantation. They would several sharecroppers on the same farm, and there was 5 or 6 houses in our area, and we all worked together.
Did you go to school during that? What time was the harvest?
But
Like when was the harvest? What time of year?
the harvest was in like late September, early October, I guess. When the cotton got ripe in the bowl, and it was back-breaking work.
Did you go to school during those times?
I went to Gideon School, and then there was a school at Peach Orchard. The main place where we lived was Peach Orchard in Missouri, and I went to school there. Then I think we moved to Gideon then, and I finished the 4th or 5th grade. Then, shall I tell all of it? But Mama left Daddy because he drank and everything, and
So
Mama left Daddy, and we moved to Springdale, Arkansas when I was 11, and I started school at Springdale, and let's see, yes, I was 11, and I started school in junior high school, and the old junior high school is still sitting on old Highway 71 in Springdale, and it had a great big metal fire escape that curved. But I don't think we ever had a fire drill, and I went down it. So
growing up until you were 10 years old, you were with your mom and your dad.
yeah,
Okay. And then you say he drank a lot?
he drank, and he was abusive and mean when he got drunk. He could whip everybody. So Mama left him, and we moved to Springdale, and then she went back to him for 1 year, and I moved back to Gideon School for the 8th grade and
When-
9th grade.
When you say he would whip everybody, what does that mean?
The what?
When you say that he would get drunk and mean and whip everybody, what does that mean?
He would. My sister was already married when I was born, and she was 14 years older than I was, and I'm sure she married to get out of the house. But he would always pick on my brother. He was 7 years older than me, and he never did abuse me much, except he would thump me on the head. And I swore up and down I'd never thump one of my kids on the head. As far as I know, I never did. But Daddy was mean. And so anyway, after a few years, Mama and Daddy divorced, and he was out of our lives for quite a while. Then he started living with my sister and her husband, or my brother and his wife in Illinois. And my husband became a preacher in 1956, and Daddy would never live with us very long because he couldn't stand not to drink, and we wouldn't let him drink in the parsonage.
So let me ask you this. When you were growing up, and while with your dad and all those, did you guys go to church?
No, I went to Sunday school when we lived in Ada Valley when I was about 6. And then when we moved to Springdale, I started going to the Nazarene church. Oh, and while we were on the farm, we called the farm that we lived on, we called it Milltown. And my neighbor took me to church one night on a Saturday. They were having a children's crusade at the First Assembly of God, and I was 11 years old, and the very first time Jesus spoke to my heart, I went to the altar. I never knew how I got there, but I remember praying and asking Jesus in my heart, and I went home and told Mama and Daddy and my brother that I had gotten saved, and they all treated it like, oh, that's fine. But they never saw that I got to go to church anymore. And then when we moved to Springdale, when I was 11, a little after 11, the Nazarene church was 2 blocks in front of my sister's house, up a side street. And I started going to Sunday school there.
How'd you get there?
Walk. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I walked. It was 2 blocks, and I'd walk up there to Sunday school, and I never stayed for church.
Just for Sunday school?
But when I was 11, through a set of circumstances, they all wanted to go somewhere, my sister, brother-in-law, and Mama, and I didn't want to go. And so I told Mama, I'll just stay home. And she said, no, if you don't go, I won't go either. And I went upstairs and I told the Lord, if you will keep me while I'm growing up and a teenager and not let me get into sin, deep sin, or any of that, when I get old enough to do what I want to do, I'll give you my life. And the Lord answered my prayer, and I went with him that day, and I kept my bargain, and God kept his. And when I was 17, 17, Joe and I both went to the altar the same night. It was on a Monday night in October of 1953. And we both gave our hearts to the Lord. And about 4 years after that, he was called to preach. And I lived my life in parsonages. And we were a team. I helped him call or visit or whatever he needed, and taught Sunday school and all the different, from kindergarten to the adults.
So let me ask you this. Do you remember where they were wanting you to go that you didn't want to go?
I do. And remember where they wanted me to go? They were wanting to go to a movie. And I had never heard a sermon about movies being bad. And I went to the movies as a kid in Marlton, but I just didn't want to go that day. And so I went that day, and the Lord kept his bargain. And
so
did
you feel convicted about going to the movie, like you shouldn't go?
I felt kind of like I shouldn't go. And I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't know at all. And movies back then weren't bad at all.
Do you remember what the movie was?
No, I don't. No, but it probably was a Western or something like that. And
you think it'll be in the background?
It's storming outside.
Is it?
Uh-huh.
You may not be able to mow anyway.
No.
So you were going to this church when you were walking every day yourself, right? Or when you was time for church. And you and Joe went to the altar. Did you grow up at a time in that church where you and Joe knew each other?
We met, and I lived in Springdale, and he lived in Fayetteville, and so he liked me, and so he come and started going to church. Well, we went to Sunday school. We never ever stayed for church, Joe and I. And then after we went together for 8 or 9 months before we got married, and we still didn't. We went to Sunday school, but we never went to church. But one Saturday night in Springdale and in that part of the country, we went to, you would go downtown and park, and you would see people, your friends, shopping. You know, the store stayed open late on Saturday, and we would visit and just sit in your car and see the people go by. Well, one Saturday night, there was a family from the Nazarene church went by, and Joe said, these were the first words out of his mouth, "It looks to me like those crazy Nazarenes would get tired of going to church." And then the next words out of his mouth, "Do you want to go?" And we weren't dressed to go that night, but we went the next Monday night. They were in revival, and we went, and we both went to the altar at the same time.
So he didn't want to go to the church at first, and then you guys went, and
He, to be with me, he decided to go. And then there was an interesting part about In those days, the evangelist or the pastor would come down off of the pulpit or stage and walk, and work the crowd. And he came to the man that was standing in front of us, and his name was Herman Boyd, and he asked him, said, "Herman, aren't you about ready to give your life to the Lord?" And Herman said no. He stepped back and he asked Joe the same question. And Joe said, "If Herman will go, I'll go." And Herman took off to the altar, and then so he and I went after him. And I remember the evangelist's name, Bob Carroll, and Keith Pagan was the song leader, was the singer for the revival.
Let me ask you this. Did your brothers, you had brothers and sisters, and they didn't go to church? They never.
My brother lived across the street from the Methodist Church in Roberts, Illinois, and he and his family would go, and his family went every Sunday. And I'm not sure about my brother, but he did not live a Christian life, and he was converted about 3 years before he died at Friendly Chapel.
Okay.
And my sister never went to church. She moved to California, and he was in the Army, and he ran around on her, so they divorced, and she moved. By then we lived in Missouri, and she didn't like living on the farm, so she moved to St. Louis and met her husband up there, her last husband and the last man she was married to. And but anyway, 17 days before she died, she asked Jesus into her heart. It was a miracle, because they had a beer joint, they had 2 beer joints, and they lived the rough life. They were wealthy with all the booze and everything, but they didn't know the Lord. And when she was sick and dying, she told me, and I told her, "There's one thing I want you to do, is ask Jesus into your heart." And she did. And she said, "I did that yesterday afternoon." And so, in Springdale. And then she died 17 days later.
So, did you have concern for them?
Oh, yes.
What was your prayer for your brother and sister?
I prayed the Lord would let our light shine till they would see Jesus in us. And my husband said they did see, and they saw we were true blue. We were not a put on. We were a real Christian. And they began to ask Joe to pray. Even when we'd go out to eat, they would ask Joe to pray, and of course he would. And but they did like to go to church. But when the last time I talked with her, she said she was ready to go to see Mr. Jesus. And then she died just a couple of weeks after that.
Let me ask you this real quick. Let me move this.
Do I need to move that light?
No. I don't think so. You can't even see it in the camera angle. Well, maybe I'll turn it back on.
Or turn this on and see how it looks.
That looks just fine.
Okay.
And you can look at me. Not even. Okay, look at the camera. So, talk to me about Joe's call to ministry, how you felt about it, and what was that like, that process?
Well, he was in the milk business, delivering milk to the houses, and then he went retail, delivering to stores. and he was the top salesman for College Club Dairy, and we were doing quite well financially. We bought a house, a modest house, but in 1956, and in the fall of late 1956, he told me he thought he had a call to preach. Scared me to death. I said, I don't know how to be a preacher's wife. Let's see, I would have been 22. No, let's see, I'd have been 20, wouldn't I? 36 to 56. And he, there was an old woman at church that was a prayer warrior, and he asked her on Wednesday night, her name was Sister Potter, and he said, would you pray for me? And she come back on Sunday morning, met him at the door, shook his hand and said, Joe, is the Lord calling you to preach? And he said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, answer that call. And Joe went down to the basement, great big long hall, and went into a room that had a door to another room off the hall, and he went into that little private room, and he took, by then we had Bill and Gail, and he said, I don't know when I'll be home. I'll be home when I get an answer. And I wished I would have remembered how long it was, because it was on a Wednesday night after service. And he stayed in that room and prayed until he knew he was called to preach. He was afraid to open his eyes. He backed out of the room because he said, I knew I would have seen Jesus or the Holy Spirit standing there, but I knew the Lord. And he said, I promise God, I'll be the man if you will support the man. And so he told our very first pastor. By then we lived in Fayetteville and out of Springdale, and the pastor said, okay, Joe, start preaching. I'll line you up. So he lined him up some churches, like on maybe a Saturday night, and have a special service. And he'd take the teens from Springdale, and Joe would preach, and he just started preaching. He didn't know how, but he just started preaching. And the Lord gave him grace to do it. And then, but anyway, the pastor's wife, our old pastor's wife, told me, said, you don't have to be a pastor's wife. Do you know how to be Joe's wife? And I said, yes. Because we'd already been married, for 4 years by then. And I said, yes. And she said, you just be Joe's wife, and whatever needs to be done in the church, be free to do if you can, but just be Joe's wife. So that was the way I entered the ministry.
That's going to be in the background. Let me wait for this to pass a little bit. This rain. Can you hear it? Can you hear the rain?
I can't hear it.
Oh. It'll be in the background.
Oh well. I'll give it some
I can't hear it.
ambiance.
Let me ask you this. How long were you and Joe in the ministry together?
It was almost 40 years, about 38 years. And maybe a little bit longer, I don't remember exactly. But he retired. But another interesting thing, we had our house in Fayetteville, and we moved. Our first parsonage was in Jonesboro, Arkansas. We drove 18 months from Fayetteville to Eureka Springs, and pastored that church. It had been closed, but we opened it back up, and it's a tourist town, and we had 45 or something like that on Sunday in the summertime, but in the winter it was around 30. But anyway, we tried to sell our house. It wouldn't sell. We moved to Jonesboro, and we pastored there for 2 years. Then we moved to Mountain Home. And I'm saying this, do things just happen, or is there a plan? We moved to Mountain Home. We were there 3.5 years. And in March of that year, Joe's father died. And Joe was so distraught of his mother had died the first year we were married. And Joe was so distraught, he said, Lydia said, let's just move to California. He said, I can get a job with Bob. His father-in-law is a concrete contractor, and I can work with Bob. He knew how to build. And it was in March. And in June, we had a revival with an evangelist named J.V. Langford. And our house sold in June in Fayetteville. And Brother Langford said, Joe, you need to go to Bethany. We had our equity, and so after 3.5 years in Mountain Home, we moved to Bethany. Now that was not a coincidence.
So did you go to the college there?
Joe went to college, signed up as a true freshman with remedial English. But he had never even graduated from the 8th grade.
Joe?
Joe. He was hard of hearing, but he read everything he got his hands on. He passed the physics test to enter college with a 98%. I said, how did you know physics? I could figure it out. But anyway, he was a scholar after that. And he had an extensive library. And we stayed, and he got all the religion courses they would let him have without doing all the rest of the stuff. I guess it'd be like an associate's degree or something. But anyway, we moved to Texas, and then we moved to Gainesville. Then we moved to Jacksonville, Arkansas, and we had a great ministry at Jacksonville.
So let me ask you this. Do you know Joe's history of his childhood?
He was raised in a very modest home. They all loved the Lord, but I don't think they ever went to church. But there was Pentecostal background. So if they told you, they would say they were Pentecostal. But they were loving family. There was 6 kids, 2 sisters and 4 brothers. And Joe was the 3rd in the child. And they were a good family.
So why did he only stop at the 8th grade?
He couldn't hear, and his parents let him, and the teacher didn't push him. And so he said, if Mom and Dad would have made me go, I might have done better. But they just let him stay out. He got I don't know how old he was when he got his first job at the U of A, and one of the washing dishes in one of the girls' dining rooms, dormitory dining rooms, but he was a learned. One man from Henderson told me that Joe was the best educated man he'd ever met, and he didn't know that he'd never had finished college nor high school, but he was he had wisdom of the Lord in dealing with people, and he treated the church like a family. So therefore, our church grew just from families, getting in. And that's what I attribute it to.
So real quick, can you list of all the churches that you can think that you guys pastored at?
You want to name them? Okay, it was Eureka Springs, Jonesboro Rogers Chapel, Stephenville, Texas.
Mountain Home.
I forgot Mountain Home.
Start all over.
Okay. Eureka Springs, Jonesboro, Mountain Home, Stephenville, Texas, Gainesville, Texas, Jacksonville, Arkansas, Henderson, Texas, Mount Pleasant, Texas. Seems like I left out one, but I can't think of what it was. Maybe 8 was all we pastored on. North Arkansas, Rose City. We pastored Rose City before we went to Henderson, Texas.
And how many years did he pastor?
30, almost 38, I believe. And he retired early in 1994, and we moved to the Friendly Chapel, and we moved into that apartment behind the longhouse where I lived, where Paul Phillip lives up there. And then we were there until he died. He died 4.5 months after we moved there in 1995.
Let me ask you this. What would you say to a young person who is feeling a call to ministry?
Be honest. Open your heart to the Lord and let the Lord lead you. And if you'll listen, I don't hear a voice unless it's a spirit speaking to me. But be true to the Lord. Don't try to be somebody you're not. Be honest in all of your dealings. And stay true to your family and your wife and kids, and keep your kids in church. And I pray that they would want to go to church. And if you'll pray around the altars at home, I say, if you keep their hearts tender when they're little, they'll want to. And all 3 of the kids became church people. Bill was a teacher, and Gail was a church woman, and Donna, you know what all she does. She's a church administrator. And then their children are coming along, and that's a great comfort to me. With all the 14 little greats, as far as I know, they're all in church every Sunday. And did that just happen? No, that was God's plan.
Let me ask you this. When you hear the verse, you will reap what you sow, what does that say to you?
Yes, you will. If you're hateful and mean, it'll come back to you. And whatever you are at 55, you'll just be that much more sadder unless you know the Lord. But I do have a joy. I'm not well, but I do have a song that Jesus gave me when He washed my sins away. He put within my heart a melody, and I know it's there to stay. And be true, honest, and above board, and always go do whatever needs to be done.
Let me ask you this. What would you say to a wife who their husband is feeling a call to ministry and they're like, I don't know about that.
Well, do you love your husband? Would you follow him to the ends of the earth? And I told one girl, and she said, I live in Scott, and I wouldn't follow him to North Little Rock. And but anyway, I would have gone. One time, this Brother J.V. Langford said, I almost recommended your name in Fargo, North Dakota. Joe said, I'd have gone if they'd have called me, if he felt like it, but they didn't, and so we didn't have to move north.
Let me ask you this. So, let's see here. You've seen the Nazarene Church change a lot over the years. What are some things that you've seen? What was it like back then?
It was very legalistic. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you did this, and in Springdale, a lot of the people would say, I know I'm saved and sanctified holy. The only thing is, I don't think they realize that holy is spelled W-H-O-L-L-Y and not just whole H-O-L-Y, because to be sanctified holy means you'll walk with the Lord wherever He sends you. But the church was very legalistic. They wouldn't have wanted a pastor's wife wearing sleeves like this. And pastors' wives couldn't wear slacks. And you didn't get your ears pierced. You didn't wear a lot of jewelry. And when Joe was ordained in 1964, the general superintendent, I had on a wedding band and a teensy tiny diamond. You'd have had to have a magnifying glass to see it, but he had us pull off our engagement rings.
What?
And because it was worldly. And so thank God we got out of the legalistic, but now I think we're too much catering and trying to do as the world, but we'll never be able to win the world acting like them. The only way is to show Jesus. And somebody said, be so salty that they'll want a drink of water, the true living water. And I don't think I've ever caused anybody to be that thirsty, but I wished I was.
Let me ask you this. What was the greatest, as a pastor's wife and a pastor, what was the greatest hurt that you felt from the church people as a pastor and pastor's wife?
Well, for one thing, I didn't work outside some. I worked some in our first few years of marriage, but I didn't work all the time. And they thought because I didn't work, I could do anything at the church that needed to be done. So one time they said that in a board meeting, and Joe said, now wait a minute. I don't have a secretary at church. Liddy's my secretary. She sees that I need to be where I'm supposed to be, and she takes care of me, and I don't want y'all to mess that up because I'm not the best rememberer in the world. And so I still did a lot of the things, but that was hurt. That hurt when they thought I didn't do anything. And I did have ladies' meetings in the parsonage and at Henderson, Texas. Then when we moved to Mountain Home, I thought, it's a little bit bigger church. And I started it, and they weren't interested. They would not come. One or two. So I felt like, well, that kind of hurt, but that was okay. I filled my days with sewing. I sewed everything we wore, or I wore, and Mama and my girls. And so I filled my days with that kind of. And I canned hundreds of quarts of green beans and tomatoes and corn and peas and froze, and every year. I might not have a big garden, but the people would bring me. But I guess the hardest thing was some of the things that people would say to you. You know, one woman didn't like my name. One woman didn't like Gail's name. And she told us and wanted to know if she'd call me Ann. I said, well, you can call me Ann, but I may not answer you because I've been Lydia too long. But anyway, it's personality problems. It's just people that are trying to rule your life, you know, want to make me do what they want to do.
What was your greatest joy from being a pastor and pastor's wife?
When Gail and Bill accepted the Lord, and Joe got to baptize them where they were at, when we were at Mountain Home. And then I don't know if Joe baptized you or not.
Stephenville, Texas.
Huh?
Stephenville, Texas.
Okay, in Stephenville. But to know that my kids had asked Jesus into their hearts, that's the most important thing you can give a child is Jesus. Or that's my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So, clothing. You didn't go to the store and buy clothing for your kids or anything?
I'm sorry?
To clothes to wear, you didn't go to the store and buy clothes?
We bought Bill's shirts and we bought the girls some things, but most of the clothes back then, I guess I made them and kept Mama in coats and jackets, and Gail, after she went to school, she'd need a long dress for something, and I'd have to send it to her and let her hem it because I didn't know how, tall she was. But
so did you ever come in and like she'd hemmed it up here?
As far as I know, y'all never did dress that short, did you?
I'll hem that for you, Mom. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Wow. What's your favorite Bible verse?
The first one I ever learned was train up a child, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And the next one is, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and he will bring things to pass. That might not be just exactly. And then trust in the Lord, lean not unto your own understanding.
That's good. Do you think there's things in your life that the Lord kept you from and protected you from?
Oh, yes. Yes. I asked the Lord to keep me from bad things as a teenager. And he did. My sister and brother-in-law had a tavern, and just by nature, being in the family, I would go with her out there every once in a while. Well, the old men in the tavern would want to buy me a Coke, 14, 15-year-old girl, and they'd let them buy me a Coke, and they'd, flirt with me and everything, but I was shy. You won't believe it, but my middle name was Bashful. And I worked at my brother-in-law's cafe, and the year I was 15, he let me do the cashier. And the old men there would try to trick me. And one day I was arguing with a customer, and my brother-in-law said, "Now remember, a customer's always right." I said, "Not when they're trying to cheat me, they're not." And so I come out of a little bit of the bashfulness. But yes, God kept me. I never was in a how do I say it, a suggestive situation I didn't know how to handle. God just protected me. And I had a lot of friends, girlfriends and boyfriends, but then when I met Joe when I was 15, what does a 15-year-old know? But I knew he was Mr. Right for me. And he, at that time, lived in Wichita, Kansas with a friend and his father. They were building tract houses for the Air Force Base there. But he came home at Thanksgiving and we met, and then he went back, and then at Christmas time he come home to stay to Fayetteville, and we were together all the time after that. And then we got married in August of 1952.
Let me ask you this. Your brother and sister didn't believe upon Christ until they were much older.
Older, yeah.
Are there hard times that you can look back and say, man, that was because they didn't follow Christ?
Well, yeah, there was things in both of their lives that was so sad. And my brother, do you want to hear the nitty-gritty?
Yeah.
My brother was a state trooper, and women love men in uniforms. He run around on my sister-in-law. They were married almost 25 years, and she divorced him. And then he had a live-in for 11 years, and I just wonder if he was true to her. But anyway, like I said, I can't remember exactly what year it would have been that Dean went to the altar there at Friendly Chapel. He was down from Illinois to visit. And then my sister, I think my sister was true to her husband, but I'm pretty sure one time he had an affair, and probably with the waitress that he had. By that time he had 2 beer joints. They were called taverns, but they were beer joints. And but she never said, and their life was not happy. They were well to do, but they were not happy. You know, it was not a joyous occasion. We would go, and the kids would laugh at how they'd fuss and fight and throw wet dish rags at one another, and they thought that was funny. But and as far as my daddy, as far as I know, he never ever, when he lived with us, we could get him to kneel and pray, and he would cry, but he just never could believe for himself. And I'd say, "Daddy, just say, 'Jesus, I believe you.'" And he would say, "Oh, sis, I've just been too mean." And he lived a rough life, and he died in Marlton, Arkansas. They said he dropped dead on the street, and he was drunk. And the only hope I have is that could cry out, "Jesus, help me." But I don't know about that. But now Mama gave her heart to the Lord. Oh, but the last time I talked to her, I guess she was in the nursing home, and I asked her, "How is it with your heart?" And she said, "I'm ready to meet Jesus." And as far as I know, she did not live a Christian life. She would go to church, and she would go to the Nazarene church there in Springdale. But as far as I know, she never went to the altar or prayed or anything until in the nursing home when I asked her.
Let me ask you this. Are you the one that led your whole family to the Lord?
Well, I may have been the one that asked them. I pray that they saw my life, and my husband always said they saw that we were real, and we never, put on. So
If as a young girl, if you wouldn't have given your life to Christ and lived for Him your whole life, do you think your family, your brothers and sisters and mom, do you think they would have ever come to Christ?
well, yes, I prayed they would. So, but I don't know. But my life has been an open book ever since 11 years old, and the Lord kept me from a lot of things, and I never took a drink, and I never puffed on a cigarette. And I mean, that's two of the main things that my sister died from emphysema, and Daddy died from alcoholism, and Dean became a drunk, but he finally saw the light. And but yes, I pray my family would have found the Lord. I expected them to.
Yeah.
And I still pray for all the other 14 little greats and 6 great-grandchildren. And
What's your ministry now that you're older, and what do you think of as your ministry? You still have a ministry.
that what?
What is your ministry now? You still have a ministry.
Prayer. And I don't know the answers to all of my prayers, but I've had enough answered that I believe in prayer. And one day Donna and I were praying for a revival in our family. And then she told me about an incident. And so I know God hears, and I'm not anybody can pray. But I believe in prayer. And sometimes prayer is hard work. I mean, when you really pray in the Spirit, it's hard work. One time I prayed for a lady, and her life was so messed up. She and another lady and I prayed, and when the next day I was as sore as if you'd taken a sledgehammer and beat on me. Your cells just clam up, but it's worth it if you can get somebody to turn to the Lord.
What kind of answers to prayer have you seen over the years?
Oh my. Well, Bill and Gail and Donna found a good mate, and we prayed for that all of their lives. And the grandchildren and y'all are living the life. And as far as I know, the other ones that don't live here are. So those are the most important I can think of. It's not things, it's people. And I've prayed for cars. I've prayed for my my sewing machine when it wouldn't work. And lo and behold, I'd start tightening it up and loosening until it'd start working. I prayed for cars. Our car broke down. I prayed for a new wheel. It just happened to be an old bus out there, and that wheel fit the Buick. Now that didn't just happen, but that was on our way from Rogers Chapel to Springdale for Christmas, and it was Christmas Eve, and the man was the slowest person, and I kept saying, Lord, make him hurry, he's going to close and we need a wheel. And he found that wheel and it just fit. I don't know anything about wheels, but he just put it on there and we drove to Springdale. We had a 1961 Buick, and that would have been in about 1960. It would have been about a 59 Buick, and about 1960 we bought a 59 Buick. So I know God answers prayers in a hurry.
Well, I think we've got enough. Is there anything you want to say?
If you're not gonna live for the Lord, why bother? There's people that think they're living for the Lord, but if it's not in your heart and you live upright, you're wasting your time. Be true to the Lord. That's what I told them in San Antonio. They asked me that very same question, and I said, if you're not going to be whole hog for the Lord, why bother? Because you don't have to get up and go to church. But if you're a Christian and you can go, you got to. You ought to. There's circumstances. I hope I can't get there, but I love the Lord with all my heart. And I'm going to serve Him the rest of my life. And I don't think I'm depressed. I do get discouraged with my sickness. But I know the Lord's helped me, and I'm too blessed to be depressed. And I go through this house thanking Him every day for just this chair. Let's see. That was the only chair I ever bought. And the rest of it was given to me. And this house, and the Lord blessed me. And I live here amongst all of you called it a village the night you dedicated JJ. And so I live in this village compound, I call it. And God has blessed me.
Well, we love you.
I've waded in both oceans, the Gulf of Mexico, the Mediterranean, the Sea of Galilee. I've drunk water as it flowed out of the rock on Mount Hermon. Oh, the Lord's blessed me. From a barefoot girl in southeast Missouri in a cotton patch to now. I'm still not a somebody, only in Jesus' eyes. He loves me.
Well, we love you too. Let's turn that air on, and then I'll take some pictures of your pictures.
All right.